Hello, everybody. My name's Andrew, and welcome to AlgoPath. This is the first video in a series of 6 where we will go through specific contents related to the Bebras challenge. And in this particular video, we will look at 3 challenges. The first one is from Pathfinders called Pig Latin. Then we will look at Countdown, and we'll finalize the video with Stop at 0. So let's have a quick look at the actual Bebras site. We can see over here, this is the UK Bebras, and the whole session for today and for the remaining 5 sessions are going to be based on understanding Python and what you need to know in order to complete these coding challenges. We will also be going through these actual challenges in person. This is an example of one of them. So we're going to be looking at the actual task. We're going to be producing code, and we're going to try to understand how the thinking process is and how we actually perform this Python challenge. Now, throughout this session, we are going to be using an online platform, which is called Blockly and Python Editor. This platform was actually designed from the company, from AlgoPath Coding Academy, and it's an excellent platform. Why is it excellent? Because if you're new to Python and you're not really sure how things work, then you can go on the left-hand side and you can start dragging in blocks, and it will actually produce the code for you over here. How cool is that? Alternatively, we can come over here and we can write our own code. Let me just write a very simple piece of code here, and we'll say print index. And there you go. The blocks have been created. So this is very beneficial for those students that are quite new to this and they're not quite sure how coding works. So we can have a look at the blocks on the left in addition with the coding on the right. So this is a platform we will be using throughout these sessions. Okay, so let's get started. And first of all, I'm going to introduce the Python knowledge that is needed in order to be able to produce these coding challenges here. So let's begin. The first topic of the day is list string slicing. Now, what is this? Well, first of all, in order to understand what this is, we need to understand what a list is. And this here is a list. A list is basically a variable. So each one of these essentially are single variables. And what we do in a list, we simply put them all together in what we call a list, hence the name list. Now we can have positive indexes where we have 0 up until 6. Make a note here that we always begin from 0 in coding. Or we can have negative indexes. In this case, we have -7 here, and this goes all the way to -1. Now, where would we need this information? Where would we use this? Well, a list is one of the most commonly used attributes in Python coding. And let's take a real life example. Let's say that we have a picture, and we have a picture of 200 by 200 pixels. And for whatever reason, we just want to cut off the bottom of this. Let's say 50 pixels. So therefore, we are left with 150 pixels here. We have 200 up here, and we're going to cut off 50 pixels. In order to do that, then we are going to use slicing. Why? Because a picture is made up of pixels. And essentially, these pixels, as you can see here, they are just lists and lists and lists of different numbers, which are representative of these colors. So let's get into what these are. Okay, I have a list here, and this is my starting list. And you can see here we have 50, 70, 30, 20, 90, 10, and 50. Now, if I use the concept of lists, which is the first number I put is the initial value. The second number is the end value. And the third number, if I use it, is the jumping value. So quite simply, what I could do is I could make a list here, and I could say 1 to 10 and jump every 2. So that would count from 1 to 10. It wouldn't actually reach 10 because we always have 1 less when we show these values. So that would print from 1 to 9 every 2 values, starting from 1. Okay, so if we look at this example now over here, we can see that if we type in list 1, 5, then that's going to grab for me 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, stop. It's not going to grab 5 because of what I just said before. It always grabs 1 less. So it's going to come down here and grab the 4. And there you can see 0, 1, 2, 3, which is 4 separate variables. Let's have a look at a quick example here now. So on the left-hand side, you can see the Python, and on the right-hand side, you can see the blocks of exactly the same code. So I have a list, which is 1, 2, 3. And if I now print my list with square brackets, because I'm trying to access the index now, each one of these essentially are an indexed value. So if I want to access number 6 of this list, I would type in list 6. And then I could access the 6th value. So over here, I'm trying to access the 3rd value. Okay, there should be some alarm bells ringing in your mind because remember that a list always begins from 0. So this is 0, 1, 2, and 3 does not exist. So if I try to print my list 3, it's not going to give me anything. It's going to be empty. And if I try to print a list of 3 to the end, which is basically what this means, it will still not give me anything because it's going to be an empty list because there is nothing after the location 2. Moving on now, let's do some more examples with these lists because, to be honest, because we can have positive and negative lists, they are really quite confusing. So the best way to overcome this is through examples. Okay, let's start with this one. Here I have a list which shows me from 0 to the end in steps of 1. So that should show me every single one of these. This one, this, and so on. Let's have a look at case 2. Case 2 says from 6 to the end, but this time -1. -1 means we're going to go this way. So that's going to print out 50, 10, 90, 20, 30, 70, 50. In other words, you have just reversed the list. Which, by the way, is a very common question in exams. Number 3, case 3, -7. So where's -7? There's -7. And it's going to go to the end in number 1, in steps of 1. So that's going to print 50, 70, 30, 20, up until number 1. Case 4, here we have -1 to the end, but this time it's going in reverse. So that's going to print out 50, 10, 90, 20, 30, 70, and 50. I hope this was enough information for you to try to understand what slicing is and how we can access the elements inside a list. Now, at this point, I suggest you stop the video right now and you can have a look at the answers on the next slide. I'm not going to go through them now, but I will display them. So this is an activity for you to go through at home. Now, the one thing I want to show you about this is that within the list, notice that we have an I and a J here. What that means is that we can start using these in a for loop and even in a nested for loop. And we can start printing out specific values in our list. Okay, solution time. Here are the solutions to the previous problem. So it's good to go through them yourselves and check your answers. Okay, let's move on now to for loops. I introduced them slightly in the previous slide when we were talking about I and J. Now, there are two methods that we can use in for loops, and they are both used interchangeably. Now, let's have a look at this first method over here. The first method here is where we take a for loop, we set an index, which in this case is number, and then we set the list. So the list was going to go from the beginning, which is 0, to the end in steps of 1. In other words, that will show the entire list. And then it's going to print the number. The number grabs each element of that list, and it's going to loop around the whole list and display those elements. In method 2, this one's a bit more complicated. What we do in this case is we set an index value, which essentially is the same as this previous one over here with number. But this time, we use something called range. And that range is going to give us a set of values. In this case, it's going to give us the length of the list. So let's say this list, which we have up here, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's 7 elements long. So what this is going to do is it's going to give us a loop around 7 times. But instead of taking the number from each element, that is 50, 70, and 30, it's just going to print the list index value. So if that index begins from 0, then it's going to print 50. So if you remember in the beginning, I said to you that we could do this list 6, and that would print out the 6th element in that list. This is doing exactly the same. So as this loop is looping around, it's going to go 1, which is going to grab the next one, 70. Then it's going to go 2, which is going to be 30. And it's going to print exactly the same as the previous one. So these are exactly the same, just a slightly different structure of accessing that information. And as you can see, they both produce exactly the same solution. Okay, so with all this information, we are now on to our first challenge. And this one is going to be Trailblazers, and it's called Pig Latin. This is a really cool one, and it's related to manipulation of strings. So let's have a quick look at what we need to do before we jump over to the code and start making this. Okay, your task is to write a program in Pig Latin, which is something made up. And all we need to do essentially is we need to give it an input. In this case, it's hello. We need to take away the first letter. We need to add a Pavla hyphen in the middle. And then we need to take that first letter and put it at the beginning of the second word, and then have a Y on the end. So in other words, we have just converted the word hello, which is in English, to something called Pig Latin, which is hello, hey. Okay, so this should work with any letter that we give it, with any word that we give it. Okay, let's move over to our code and let's start making this. Okay, so let's jump over to the platform that we talked about before. And as you can see here, I've copied in the actual instructions and I've put them with a hash symbol, which basically means they're a comment. So let's go in a little bit more detail with what we need to do here. So the first job we need to do is we need to find out is if the letter is a consonant or is it a vowel. Now, if the letter starts with a vowel, we're just going to add yay to the end of the word. If the letter begins with consonant, then we're going to do what I explained before, which is remove the first letter, add a hyphen, add the letter you removed from step 1, and then add a at the end. Okay, so let's start coding. The first thing we need to do is we need to get a word from the user. And to do that, we're going to use input. What this does is it grabs a string from the user. So type in your word, and there you see the block of this. And we're going to set another variable, which is called suffix. Okay, that's basically the beginning of our code. We're going to grab the word from the user, going to set up a variable called suffix. Now that suffix is going to contain the ending of the word, a or yay here. Okay, now we need a conditional statement which is going to find out whether it's a consonant or a vowel. So the simplest way of doing that is to use an if-else. So if the letter that we grab from the word, we're going to put it into lowercase just so we don't have any problems with uppercase, lowercase, and so on. So if letter 0, and this is going to be actually the word that we have here. So if the word 0, that means it's the first letter inside that word, dot lower, in A, E, I, O, U. So in other words, is that a vowel? If it's a vowel, then we're going to set the suffix to what it tells us here, which is hyphen yay. And that's it. Once we've done that, we can then make the result, because the result is going to be the word plus the suffix. Okay, so that kind of takes care of the vowel part. Now we need to take care of the consonant. Now, because there's only two situations here, there's no point in having if and other combinations. We're just going to simply have an else. So if it's not a vowel, then we know it's a consonant. So we're going to do some slicing now. The result equals word. We're going to go from 1 to the end. We're going to concatenate, which means add. We're going to add the slash, the hyphen that we need to add up here. This is in step 2 over here. Then we're going to add the word from the first element, and then we're going to add the final AY. That is the entire code. All we need to do is print the result. Okay, so let's just double check. We want to remove the first letter if it's a consonant. So that goes on here. We want to add the hyphen, that goes on here. So remember that everything starts from 0. So if we start from 1, we're going to remove the first letter. Then we're going to add the first letter, which we took before from here. And then we're going to add A. That looks good to me. Let's give it a shot. Now, according to what we saw before, if we type in hello, we should get LO hyphen hey. Let's run the code and see what happens. Hello. And if you look at the bottom here, it says LO slash hey. It works perfectly. So that is the solution code, simply 2, 4, 6, 10 lines of code. That's it. In fact, 8 lines of code. Only 8 lines of code to perform that challenge. Great, yeah, we did it. Okay, let's move on. Okay, welcome back to topic 2. In this case, we are going to look at iterations. In other words, looping. Now, when we do looping, there is 2 types of looping available. The first one is a for loop over here, and the second one is a while loop. Now, what's the difference? There is a significant difference between them in their usage, in the length of the code, the number of lines, how we use it, and so on. Even though we can write code in both, and they would produce exactly the same thing, there are definitely differences. The simple difference to help you remember is that if you know, let's say you have a list, and you know how many items you have in that list. So let's say I have 4 items. Then you would use a for loop. If you have a list that you are entering yourself and the user is typing it in through the keyboard, and so therefore it could be 1 element long, or it could be 100 elements long. We don't know. Then you would go with a while loop. They're the simple differences between them. There are, of course, some more specific details, but this is all we need to know at the moment. Now, in the while loop, there's 2 different kinds. There's an indefinite loop and a definite loop. I'm going to show you them both today. So let's begin with the for loop. Now, the for loop, as we saw before, is a simple for count. Count acts as the index in range 10. So this is going to count from 0 to 9. Remember that 10 is, it's never used, it's always -1. So if you want to actually get 10, you would have to put 11 there. So what happens here is that that will actually print out hello 10 times. Let's go down to this one. This one is pretty much the same thing, but this time we're skipping the 0. We're using I as the index value. Doesn't matter what you use there. You can use any variable name. And this time we're specifying the range from 1 to 11. It will not reach 11 because we always -1. So that will then print 10 as well. Now, in terms of accessing the lists, do you remember we talked about before there's 2 different methods? Here are the 2 methods again, but this time using a for loop. So we have the same list here. It's a fruits. It has apple, banana, and cherry. And in the first method, we simply choose the index to be called fruit. And that fruit is going to produce each of the values inside fruits. So in other words, it's going to grab apple, then it's going to grab banana, and then it's going to grab cherry. And it's going to print all 3 of them. It's going to print apple, then it's going to print banana, and then it's going to print cherry. Over to method 2. Method 2, we have the same list here, but this time there's a slight difference in the for loop. We still have an index. In this case, it's called I, but we're using the range from 0 to the length of the array, or the list in this case. So that's going to be 0 to 3. And remember that when we use range, it's always -1. So that should print out 0, 1, 2, which again is going to print out apple, banana, and cherry. They are exactly the same results. In the first one, we are accessing the list directly. In the second one, we are accessing it through indexing. Now, when we use range, range enables us to use a wider variety of numbers, whatever we want. And the basic limit is that when you use range, this is like in the list. This is your starting number. This is your end number. and this is the jump, the skip number. So that's going to give us every 3 until 100 minus 1. Okay, the range is very, very common in programming Python, and we use it an awful lot. So if you want a list of numbers, usually separated by 1, but it could be by 2 or 3, then the range is the place to go for that. The while loop. Now, what's the difference between the for and the while? If we have a look at the for over here, we set the index value here, and this is automatically incremented as this goes around the loop. But in the while, we do not have that. We just have a while and a condition. This is the condition, which is essentially the criteria. So what happens here is that we need to manually set the variable at the beginning and then manually increment it at the end of the while. But it would produce the same condition as the for. So if we have a look at these two examples, what we can see is this first one, it sets this to 10. It checks, is it greater than 1? Yes, it is. It runs around the loop. It prints hello. It minuses 1 from that. So I now equals 9. It goes around the loop. I is still greater than 1. It goes around the loop again. And this continues. And so therefore this will print 10 times hello. Whereas in this second one down here, this starts at 12 this time. It's the same scenario, but this time it's minus 2. So that's going to get to the end twice as fast. And therefore it's going to print 6 times hello. Okay, so this is the main difference between a for and a while loop. Now, a couple of minutes ago, I talked to you about the while loop and the two different conditions that it has. We have something called an infinite loop and a non-infinite loop, which is when it's based on a specified condition. Now, the infinite loop is quite dangerous, actually, in terms of coding. And the reason for that is that it never ends. So you have to have a break within that loop and a condition. Otherwise, it's not going to jump out and it's going to continue running forever. And it may even freeze or crash your computer. So this is a very interesting piece of code. Let's have a look at it. It basically says while forever, because true is equal to 1. It's a Boolean expression in Python. And so that runs around forever. And it takes a user input. It says enter a command or quit to exit. Now, only when the user types in the word QUIT, quit, will this be satisfied, and then it'll break out and it'll continue the code down here. Only then. There's no other time when this loop will exit. And that's called an infinite loop. So a little bit of care is needed when using that. On the other hand, we can use a loop which has a specified condition. And in this case, the specified condition is when the counter is less than 5. So while the counter is less than 5, which it is, because the counter is set to 0 manually here, then it's going to run around the loop. This here is a shortcut. It's called shorthand, and it basically means counter equals counter plus 1. Okay, so every time it goes around the loop, it's adding 1 to this. So after 5 times it's run around this loop, then counter is going to equal 5. It's no longer less than 5. It's going to automatically jump out and continue the code. Okay, this is something that's going to happen on its own. Whereas this one, with method 1, this is only going to happen when the user types in quit. Okay, here is a very nice activity for you guys to try. We have for loop questions here, and we have while loop questions here. So please pause the video here, go through these questions, follow the instructions, have some fun, make some code and see if you can do these activities. Also, another activity for you here is question 1. Given a list with integers, how do we know the sum? For example, imagine we have a list of this, and I want to find out the sum of this list. How would I count them? This could be an exam question, it could be a challenge. Well, the simple thing to do here is you make a variable called total sum. You loop around the list and you keep track of the number. In other words, when you loop around and you get 1, add it to sum. When you get 2, add it. When you get 3, when you get 4, and you should now have a total sum of 10. Let's have a look at the code. So method 1, we're going to make a list, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to manually make a variable, and then we're going to loop around, keeping track of that sum and adding the item that we grab. The item that we grab is going to be each one of these. And then we print the final sum. If we use method 2, that will give you this one, which is pretty much the same. We have the variable declared. We declare the 0. We run the loop from index to the length of input, which in this case is 4. And then we add the list index each time. They will both give you exactly the same number, which is 10. Okay, I hope you're enjoying everything so far. Let's move on to our challenge, Coding Challenge 2, 2025. And let's have a quick look at what we need to do here. This basically is a rocket launch. In this task, we're going to make a countdown timer. And the whole idea of this is that we need to write a program that displays a rocket countdown sequence. And what we need to do is we're going to input it with a number, let's say 3, 5, 10, 50, 100. According to the instructions here, it's until 100. And then we're going to count down from whatever number that is. So let's say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then we're going to print out liftoff. Okay, let's go over to our platform and run this code. Okay, here's our previous code. We're just going to get rid of that because we don't need it. And the instructions here are really simple. So I'm not even going to make a note of them here because all we need to do is take a number from the user and count that number down. Okay, so let's take a number from a user. Let's just call it number. Input. Enter your number. Now, there is a problem with this straight away, and that is something called casting. Casting means when you take a variable of a specific type and you change it to another type. Now, what you need to understand here is that when we take an input from the keyboard, even if that input is a number, it is classed as a string. A string is a text, a word, a letter. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to cast this to int. And what that does, it just converts the string, which we're going to type in, let's say 6. It's going to make it into an integer. Okay, now we need a clever little for loop. Based on what we did before, we're going to use range. And I'm going to start it from number. And I'm going to go to 0 because this is the countdown. And now the clever process of this is I'm going to hit -1, which if you remember from the first slides I showed you, actually reverses the order. So what this should now do is it should print out the numbers. Whatever number I type in, it's going to print it out and then start counting down. As soon as it's finished, we're going to print out lift off to space. And there it goes. Okay, so let's see what happens and let's see if we've made any mistakes or not. Run. Let's go with 5. And there you go. Look at the bottom of the screen. You can actually see in the terminal 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 lift off. It works fantastic. Let's try another number, a bit of a bigger number this time. Let's go with 20. It's a big rocket, this one. And again, look at the bottom, 2019. It works perfectly well. Okay, great. Nice job. Okay, let's get back over to the presentation. And we're going to jump straight into our third and final challenge. Now, in this challenge, we are going to look at something called stop at 0. This is definitely the most complicated one that we've looked at so far. So let's have a little look in detail on what's going on here. Now, what we want to do is to generate a stream of dashes, hyphen dashes, whatever you want to call them. So essentially, if I enter the value 5, then I want to print 5 dashes. Now, this program is slightly different. It has a lot of constraints. Okay, the first constraint is that if we enter a value less than 0, that means it is going to terminate. So whenever I enter anything from -1 onwards in a negative way, from -1 to minus any number we want, then that means it's the end and I have to stop. Okay, but this negative value will not be printed to the screen. So it needs to be excluded from the print. Next, we cannot have a value greater than 100. So we must start with a value less than 100. The input stream must have at least one number in it. And the input stream must have that negative number at the end so that we can terminate the process. And also, we need them in decreasing order. So as an example, we can have 7, 5, 2, 1, -2. So if you count these, that should be 7, that should be 5, that should be 2, that should be 1, and you will not see the -2. Perfect. So let's have an example of another one. 12, 4, 2, -4. That should give me 12 dashes, 4 dashes, 2 dashes, and it will not print anything else after that. That is what our code needs to do, which is pretty cool, I think, this one. Okay, let's go over to our platform and let's see if we can make this our last challenge for this series. So I hope you remember the criteria. If not, then look at it here. These are the main criteria here. Okay, it needs to be decreasing, terminates with negative number, less than 100, at least one number, and that last one is not going to be shown. Okay, so in order to do this, we are definitely going to use a while loop because we don't know when it's going to end. This is a great example of why we would use this. So I'm going to start with a while loop, and I'm going to make an infinite while loop forever. So therefore, I need to use a break. I'm going to set my number. I'm going to cast it as an input. Please enter number. You can write more things there if you want to be more polite and descriptive. Okay, now all I want to do is I've got to check if the number is positive. So if the number is less than or equal to 0, then I want to break out. Just indent this correctly. I want to break out. I don't want to do anything. Now, if it's not, then we're going to jump into a for loop because now we know what the number is. So we're going to use a for loop for the numbers that we have. So let's go now with for I in range of number. And here we need to make a variable here called symbol. Symbol, we'll just make it equal to nothing at the moment. And this is going to be symbol equals symbol plus dash. And then we're going to print that symbol. Like so. So let's just have a quick check of what's going on. We have our while loop forever, number equals int. We just need to put in another parenthesis here. And this is a great part about this code is that because there's a missing parenthesis there, you didn't see the code here. It wasn't complete. So it's also a way of error checking as well, which is very nice. So we're going to grab the numbers from the user. We're going to basically grab a stream of numbers. Remember that this stream of numbers need to be decreasing. And then we're going to make sure that when it gets less than 0 or equal to 0, it's going to break out. So let's try it. Run. And let's go with 10, 7, 5, 3, 1, and -6. So if this works, it should show us all those dashes, and the last one, it will be empty. And there you go. 10, it's looking at the numbers, 3, 6, 3, 4, 1, and nothing's shown in the end. That's it, we did it. Yes, it's working fine, and that is the code for our UK Bebras challenge of stop at 0. So now that we have all the code working, what we will do now is we're going to go back to our previous challenges, and we're going to enter each one of these into the actual Bebras challenge and see if it works. Okay, let's do this. So I'm going to grab the first one. So we're going back now to, this is the Pig Latin one that we did. So all I need to do is go to Bebras, Pathfinders, Pig Latin. And we're literally going to test it now. So I'm pasting in the code. Now, as I said when we made this code, you're not allowed to have these comments in here. Otherwise, it's going to give you an error. So I'm going to take out all the comments. I don't have any other comments there. Probably just get rid of this one as well. And submit code. Have a look down here. Show results. Passed. Test case, okay. It's passed all of them now. Great. So if you actually did this and you actually had some text inside there, even though it wouldn't be wrong in real life and in Python by giving the user some input, it would actually give you an error inside the code. So that's great. That one works fine. Let's go back to the main menu, and we're going to grab the second one. That's this one, the countdown, if you remember. And here is the code. Go straight over to Bebras. Find countdown. There it is. And we paste in the code. Again, get rid of the comments inside here in the text. Submit code. Wait a minute. Evaluating full score. Show results. Everything passed. Perfect. Perfect. Let's go back. And the last one was, here it is. This was called the Pathfinder. This is stop at 0. So we'll go to stop at 0, scroll down, paste the code in, again, get rid of these quotes and the text, and submit code. Evaluating, full score, everything's passed. Absolutely perfect. Great. So guys, I hope you enjoyed today and you got a lot from this. These 3 challenges we did, and that's the end of video 1. I'll see you in the next series.